Marcus Ray's lungs were burning as his legs pumped against the concrete, every muscle in his body screaming as he launched himself through the air. The world moved in slow motion, the massive construction truck barreling forward, its horn blaring like the scream of death itself, the driver's face frozen in horror behind the windshield, and the small boy with dark curls, no more than 5 years old, standing directly in its path. The child's red jacket was bright against the grey chaos of the construction site. His eyes were wide with confused terror. He didn't understand that he was seconds from being crushed, that his small body would be obliterated under 15,000 pounds of steel and machinery. Marcus didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't weigh his own life against this child's. He just moved. His body collided with the boy's in mid-air, his arms wrapping around the small frame with desperate strength as they tumbled together toward the ground. Marcus twisted his body at the last second, taking the impact on his own back and shoulder, cradling the child against his chest like the most precious thing in the world. They hit the concrete hard. The air exploded from Marcus's lungs. Pain shot through his spine like lightning, and the truck's wheels missed them by inches. So close, Marcus could feel the heat from the brakes, could smell burning rubber, could hear gravel spraying against his face. The truck screeched to a stop. Everything went silent, except for Marcus's ragged breathing and the small boy's terrified whimpers against his chest. Then came the scream. "Ethan!" Victoria Chen was running toward them, her designer heels clicking frantically against concrete, her perfectly styled hair coming loose from its bun, her face, usually so composed and cold, completely shattered with terror. Marcus loosened his grip on the boy but didn't let go. Not yet. His hands were shaking violently. His whole body was trembling with adrenaline and shock. The child, Ethan, looked up at him with huge brown eyes filled with tears. You saved me," he whispered. Before Marcus could respond, Victoria was there. She dropped to her knees beside them, her hands reaching for her son with a desperation Marcus had never seen in her before. Not in the 6 months he'd worked as a structural engineer at Chen Industries. Not in the countless times she'd torn into him with cutting remarks and impossible deadlines and cruel dismissals of his work. Victoria Chen, the Ice Queen CEO who ruled her company with an iron fist and showed emotion to no one, was crying. Ethan, baby, are you hurt?" Her voice cracked as she pulled her son into her arms, her hands running over his small body checking for injuries. Oh my God, you're okay. Marcus rolled onto his side, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. He could already feel the bruises forming. His shirt was torn. Blood was seeping from scrapes on his palms where they'd hit the gravel. But none of that mattered. The boy was alive. Around them, the construction site erupted into chaos. Workers were shouting. The truck driver had climbed down from his cab, his face pale and shaking. Victoria's business partners, 2 men in expensive suits who'd been touring the site with her, stood frozen in shock. And Victoria was staring at Marcus over her son's shoulder with an expression he couldn't name. Gratitude, shame, horror at what had almost happened, something deeper that made his chest tighten uncomfortably. She started, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved his life." Marcus pushed himself up to sitting, ignoring the pain shooting through his back. "He shouldn't have been here," he said quietly, not accusing, just stating fact. "This is an active construction zone. The safety protocols clearly state no children on site." Victoria flinched, like he'd slapped her. "I tried to tell you," Marcus continued, meeting her eyes, "before we left the car, but you told me to shut my mouth and do my job." The words hung between them like a verdict. One of the business partners, a silver-haired man named Robert Kim, stepped forward. "Victoria, what the hell were you thinking bringing a child here? You could have gotten him killed." Victoria's face went from pale to ashen. She held Ethan tighter, and the boy was crying now, clinging to his mother's neck. She started, but no words came. For the first time since Marcus had met her, Victoria Chen had no sharp retort, no cutting comeback, no way to control the situation. She looked lost. Marcus got to his feet slowly, testing his weight on his legs. Everything hurt, but nothing felt broken. He'd been lucky. They'd both been lucky. We should get him checked by a medic, Marcus said, keeping his voice level. Professional. Even if he looks fine. The shock alone. I know what to do with my own son, Victoria snapped, but there was no real fire in it. Just reflex. Muscle memory of being cruel because being cruel kept people at a distance, and distance kept you safe. Marcus nodded once and turned to walk away. Wait. He stopped but didn't turn around. Victoria's voice was shaking. Thank you for saving him, I don't have words for what you just did. Marcus looked back over his shoulder. Victoria was still kneeling on the ground, her expensive cream suit now dirty and torn, her son in her arms, and tears streaming down her face. She looked human. It was the most unsettling thing Marcus had ever seen. Just doing what anyone would do, he said quietly. No. Victoria shook her head. Not anyone. Most people would have frozen. You didn't hesitate. You risked your life for a child you don't even know. I know him, Marcus said. He's Ethan. He likes dinosaurs and drawing pictures of spaceships. His favorite color is blue. He told me all about it 3 weeks ago when you brought him to the office, and he wandered into the engineering department while you were in a meeting. Victoria stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Marcus allowed himself a small, sad smile. You'd be surprised what people notice when you actually see them as human beings, instead of obstacles in your way. He walked away before she could respond, heading toward the site supervisor's trailer to file the incident report. His hands were still shaking. His heart was still racing. And all he could think about was his own son. Daniel. 7 years old. Lying in a hospital bed 3 miles away with a congenital heart defect that required surgery Marcus couldn't afford. Surgery scheduled for 3 months from now that cost more than Marcus made in 2 years. He'd almost died today, almost left Daniel alone in the world with no one to fight for him. The thought made Marcus's knees weak. He stumbled slightly, catching himself against the trailer wall, took 3 deep breaths, reminded himself that he was alive, that Ethan was alive, that today wasn't the day everything fell apart. Behind him, he could hear Victoria talking to the medics who'd arrived, could hear Ethan's small voice saying he wanted the nice man who saved him to come back. Marcus closed his eyes and tried not to think about how similar the 2 boys were. How much Ethan reminded him of Daniel at that age, before the diagnosis, before the hospital visits, and the fear and the desperate scramble for money that never quite came fast enough. He couldn't afford to care about Victoria Chen's son. He had his own child to save. 6 months earlier, Marcus Ray had walked into Chen Industries with hope in his chest and desperation in his bones. The job posting had been specific. Structural engineer, specializing in sustainable high-rise development, competitive salary, immediate hire. The salary listed was double what Marcus had been making at his previous firm, double what he needed to start saving for Daniel's surgery. It felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The interview had been brutal. Victoria Chen had sat across from him in her corner office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her suit tailored and expensive, her eyes sharp and calculating as she'd torn apart his portfolio with surgical precision. This design is derivative, she'd said, pointing to a building he'd worked on for 18 months. The load-bearing calculations are adequate but uninspired. The sustainability features are trendy rather than innovative. Marcus had sat there and taken it because he needed this job more than he needed his pride. Your resume shows a gap of 7 months, Victoria had continued, her eyes never leaving his face. Care to explain? My son was diagnosed with a heart condition, Marcus had said quietly. I took time off to care for him and arrange his treatment. Victoria's expression hadn't changed. And now you need money for that treatment, which is why you're desperate enough to accept a position here despite being overqualified and underprepared for the level of work we do. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Cold, accurate, cruel. Marcus had met her eyes and said, yes. Something had flickered across Victoria's face then. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a fellow survivor. She'd hired him on the spot with one condition. He would work harder than anyone else in the department, accept any assignment without complaint, and prove that his personal life wouldn't interfere with his work. Marcus had agreed. He'd spent the last 6 months regretting it. Victoria Chen was brilliant. Her designs were revolutionary. Her business instincts were flawless, and she was the cruelest boss Marcus had ever worked for. She singled him out in meetings, pointing out flaws in his work that didn't exist. She gave him impossible deadlines and then criticized him for the quality of work produced under pressure. She scheduled client presentations during hours she knew he needed to be at the hospital with Daniel, then acted disappointed when he had to choose between his son and his job. She was testing him, breaking him down, trying to find his limit. Marcus didn't have the luxury of a limit, so he endured. He worked 18-hour days. He brought Daniel to the office when he couldn't find childcare. He smiled through the criticism and the impossible demands and the casual cruelty that seemed to be Victoria's default setting. And he watched her, watched the way she poured herself into her work like she was running from something, watched the way she kept everyone at arm's length with sharp words and sharper boundaries, watched the rare moments when Ethan visited the office and something soft would flicker across her face before she locked it away again. Victoria Chen was brilliant and broken, and Marcus understood broken better than most people. But understanding her didn't make working for her any easier. The day after the construction site incident, Marcus arrived at work to find his desk surrounded by flowers. Dozens of arrangements, expensive ones, lilies and roses and orchids in crystal vases with cards that all said some variation of, "Thank you for saving Ethan." His co-workers were staring, whispering. Sarah Chen from accounting, no relation to Victoria despite the shared surname, leaned over her cubicle wall and said, "Holy shit, Marcus. What did you do to get on the Ice Queen's good side?" "Saved her kid's life," another engineer, David, called from across the room. "It's all over the company email. Apparently there's security footage from the construction site that shows the whole thing." Marcus's stomach dropped. "There's footage?" "Hell yeah, there's footage." David pulled up his computer screen. "It's insane, man. You're like an action hero. The way you just launched yourself at the kid. No hesitation. It's incredible." Marcus didn't want to see it. Didn't want to relive those terrible seconds when he'd thought he might not reach Ethan in time. But David was already playing the video, and the office was gathering around to watch. The angle was from a security camera mounted on one of the construction trailers. It showed everything in stark, horrible clarity. Ethan running toward the truck path. Victoria distracted, talking to her business partners. The truck coming around the corner. And Marcus, sprinting from the other side of the site, his face set with determination as he launched himself through the air. The impact, the tumble, the truck's wheels stopping inches from where they'd fallen. Victoria's scream as she ran toward them. The office was silent when the video ended. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered. "You're a hero." Marcus turned away from the screen, feeling sick. "I just reacted. Anyone would have done the same." "No," a voice said from behind him. "They wouldn't have." Victoria stood in the entrance to the bullpen, perfectly composed again in a navy suit and heels, her hair immaculate, her face an unreadable mask, but her eyes were different, softer, haunted. "Mr. Ray, my office, please." It wasn't a request. Marcus followed her through the bullpen, aware of every pair of eyes watching them. Victoria's office was on the top floor, all glass and steel and minimalist furniture that probably cost more than Daniel's surgery. She closed the door behind them and gestured to a chair. Marcus sat, waiting. Victoria walked to her desk but didn't sit. She stood there for a long moment, her back to him, staring out at the city skyline. "I've been cruel to you," she said finally. "Deliberately cruel. I gave you impossible assignments and criticized work that didn't deserve criticism. I scheduled meetings during your son's hospital appointments. I made your life here as difficult as possible." Marcus said nothing. "I did it because you scared me," Victoria continued, still not turning around. "You came into my company with your quiet competence and your dedication to your son and your refusal to compromise your values, no matter how much pressure I put on you. And that scared me because it reminded me of who I used to be before I decided that being feared was safer than being vulnerable." She turned to face him then, and Marcus saw something in her expression that looked almost like shame. "Yesterday you saved my son's life. You risked your own life without hesitation for a child I deliberately kept you from getting close to. You did it even though I've spent 6 months making your professional life a nightmare." Her voice cracked slightly. "Why?" Marcus met her eyes. "Because he's a child, and children deserve to be protected, even when their parents make mistakes." The words hung in the air between them like an accusation and an absolution all at once. Victoria sat down in her chair slowly, like the weight of what he'd said had made her legs weak. "I brought him to that construction site because I wanted to prove something to the investors," she said quietly. "That I could manage both my company and my son. That being a mother didn't make me weak or distracted. That I had everything under control." She laughed bitterly. "I almost got him killed trying to prove I was in control." "You made a mistake," Marcus said. "Parents make mistakes." "Do you?" Victoria asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. "Make mistakes with your son?" Marcus thought about all the times he'd chosen extra shifts over bedtime stories, all the hospital appointments where he'd been too exhausted to really listen to Daniel's fears, all the ways he was failing even as he fought so hard to save his son's life. "Every day," he admitted. Victoria nodded slowly. "Tell me about him. Your son. Daniel, right?" Marcus was surprised she remembered his name. "He's 7. He likes space and dinosaurs and building things out of Legos. He's brilliant and funny and braver than I'll ever be." His voice caught. "He has a congenital heart defect. Tetralogy of Fallot. He needs surgery in 3 months or—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes intent on his face. Or his heart will fail," Marcus said simply. "The surgery costs $300,000. Insurance covers some of it, but I'm still short about $120,000. I've been working every hour I can, taking on side projects, selling everything I own that isn't essential." He laughed without humor. "That's why I took this job despite knowing it would be hell, because you pay well, and I'm desperate." Silence filled the office. Then Victoria said, "I'll pay for it." Marcus's head snapped up. "What?" "The surgery. I'll pay for it. All of it. Consider it a thank you for saving Ethan's life." "No." The word came out harsher than Marcus intended. "I don't want your money." Victoria blinked, clearly not used to being refused. "Why not? You just said you're desperate. I'm offering you a solution." "Because my son's life isn't a transaction," Marcus said firmly. "I didn't save Ethan to get something from you. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and I won't let you turn it into a debt I owe or a debt you owe. It doesn't work like that." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Respect, maybe, or something deeper. "You're proud," she said. "I'm a father," Marcus corrected. "And I won't teach my son that we accept charity from people who've spent months treating us like we're worthless." The words were harsh but true. Victoria flinched. "You're right. I have no right to offer you anything after how I've treated you." "But Marcus—" She paused, seeming to struggle with something. "What if it wasn't charity? What if you earned it?" "I already earn my salary," Marcus pointed out. "Not like this." Victoria pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. "I have a project, a massive sustainable housing development that's been stalled for 8 months because I can't find an engineer who can solve the structural challenges while maintaining the environmental standards I've committed to. She pushed the folder toward him. Solve it, and I'll give you a bonus. $120,000. Marcus stared at the folder without touching it. That's not how bonuses work. It is when I say it is. Victoria's voice had that steel edge again. The CEO taking control. I'm offering you a chance to save your son and keep your pride intact. This is a real project that needs a real solution. If you can deliver it, you'll have earned every penny. Marcus finally reached for the folder and opened it. The project was ambitious. A 200-unit housing complex designed to be completely carbon neutral, using recycled materials and renewable energy. The structural challenges were immense. The timeline was aggressive. It was exactly the kind of impossible task Victoria had been giving him for 6 months. Except this time, the stakes were Daniel's life. 3 months, Victoria said. That's when your son's surgery is scheduled, right? You have 3 months to solve this. Do it, and I'll have the money transferred to the hospital the day before his surgery. Marcus looked up from the folder to find Victoria watching him with an intensity that made his chest tight. Why? He asked. Why does it matter to you whether I keep my pride or not? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Because yesterday I watched you risk everything for my son without expecting anything in return, and it made me realize that I've spent the last 10 years building walls so high that I forgot what it felt like to trust anyone. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I want to be the kind of person who deserves to be saved, and I think helping you save your son might be a start. Marcus took the folder home that night with his mind racing and his heart heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Daniel was awake when Marcus got home to their small apartment, even though it was past 9. He was sitting up in bed with his tablet, watching videos about space exploration, his small face pale but smiling. Dad! He brightened when Marcus walked in. You're late. Did you save any more kids today? News travelled fast, even to 7-year-olds. Marcus had gotten 3 calls from Daniel's school asking about the incident. Apparently the security footage had gone viral on social media. His son was now convinced his father was a superhero. Just the one, Marcus said, sitting on the edge of Daniel's bed. How are you feeling, buddy? Daniel shrugged, a gesture that was trying to be casual, but couldn't quite hide the fatigue in his eyes. Okay. Nurse Amy says my numbers are stable. He paused. She also says the surgery is soon. 3 months, Marcus confirmed, brushing Daniel's dark hair back from his forehead. And then you'll be all better, strong enough to run and play and do all the things you want to do. Daniel looked down at his hands. What if it doesn't work? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. It will work. But what if it doesn't? Daniel's voice was small, scared. What happens to you if I die? Marcus pulled his son into his arms, holding him tight enough to feel his heartbeat, irregular, but still fighting. You're not going to die. I won't let you. You can't control everything, Dad. Daniel's voice was muffled against Marcus's chest. That's what Mom used to say. Marcus closed his eyes against the pain of that memory. Daniel's mother, Sarah, had died in a car accident when Daniel was 3. She'd been right. You couldn't control everything, but that didn't mean you stopped fighting. No, I can't control everything, Marcus admitted, but I can make sure you have the best surgeon, the best hospital, and every possible chance to survive. And I will do that, Daniel. I promise you. Daniel pulled back to look at him with those serious dark eyes that sometimes seemed too old for his age. Is that why you work so much? To pay for the surgery? Yes. Is that why you took the job with the mean lady? Marcus couldn't help but smile slightly at the description. Ms. Chen isn't mean. She's just complicated. And yes, that's why I took the job. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, She must feel really bad about her son almost getting hurt. I think she does. You should be nice to her, Dad. She's probably scared, like you get scared about me. The wisdom of children was sometimes staggering. Marcus kissed the top of Daniel's head. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't always listen. Daniel grinned, but it faded quickly. The kids at school saw the video. They're saying you're a hero. I'm not a hero. I just did what needed to be done. That's what heroes do, Dad. Daniel settled back against his pillows, his energy clearly fading. They do what needs to be done, even when it's scary. Marcus stayed with him until he fell asleep, watching the rise and fall of his son's chest, counting each breath like a prayer. Then he went to the kitchen table and opened Victoria's folder. The sustainable housing project was even more complex than he'd initially thought. The site was on reclaimed industrial land with soil contamination issues. The building codes required special accommodations. The environmental standards Victoria had committed to were among the most stringent in the industry. It would take every bit of skill Marcus had. Long nights, innovative solutions, probably some failures before he found what worked. But it was possible. Barely, but possible. Marcus pulled out his laptop and started working. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office to find Chen sitting in the lobby with Victoria. The boy was wearing a small backpack decorated with dinosaurs, and he brightened immediately when he saw Marcus. "You're the spaceman," Ethan announced, running over to him. "Mummy says you like rockets like me." Marcus glanced at Victoria, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have mentioned that your son shares some interest with Ethan. He's been asking about you since yesterday." "Can I see your office?" Ethan asked, bouncing on his toes with 5-year-old excitement. "Mommy says you draw buildings. I like drawing. Can I draw with you?" Marcus looked at Victoria again. She was watching the interaction with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or fear that he'd reject her son after saving his life. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes, Marcus said slowly. "But you can come up and draw for a few minutes if your mum says it's okay." "Please, Mommy." Ethan looked up at Victoria with those huge brown eyes that probably got him anything he wanted. Victoria nodded. "Just for a few minutes. I have calls to make." Marcus led Ethan up to the engineering department, acutely aware of his co-workers watching with undisguised curiosity. The Ice Queen's son, spending time with the engineer she'd tormented for months. The office gossip mill would be running overtime. Ethan settled at Marcus's desk with a stack of paper and coloured pencils, immediately beginning to draw what appeared to be a rocket ship crossed with a dinosaur. "This is Rexter," Ethan explained seriously. "He's a T-Rex who goes to space to eat asteroids." Marcus couldn't help but smile. "Sounds like a good plan. Asteroids are a problem." "Do you have a little boy?" Ethan asked, not looking up from his drawing. "I do. His name is Daniel. He's 7. Is he sick?" "Mummy said you take care of a sick boy." The directness of children was sometimes brutal. "Yes, he has a problem with his heart, but he's going to have surgery soon to fix it." Ethan looked up at him with solemn eyes. "My mommy says surgery is scary, but it helps people. She says you're very brave for taking care of Daniel." Marcus was surprised. Victoria had been talking about him to Ethan, saying he was brave. "Your mommy is very brave too," Marcus said. "It's not easy running a big company and taking care of you." Ethan nodded seriously. "Mommy works a lot. She says she has to, because she has to take care of me and all the people who work here. But sometimes I think she's lonely." He went back to his drawing. "Are you lonely, Mr. Marcus?" The question hit harder than it should have. Was he lonely? He had Daniel. He had his work. He had the singular focus of keeping his son alive. But yes, he was profoundly, achingly lonely. "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "Me too," Ethan said. "But I think we should be friends. Then we won't be lonely anymore." Before Marcus could respond, Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Ethan, time to go. Mr. Ray has work to do." Ethan carefully gathered his drawings. "I made this for your son." He handed Marcus the picture of Rextor, the space dinosaur. "Tell him Ethan says he hopes the surgery makes him all better." Marcus took the drawing, his throat tight. "Thank you, Ethan. He'll love this." After they left, Sarah from accounting came over to Marcus's desk. "Okay, what is happening?" "Victoria Chen never brings Ethan to the office, and she definitely never lets him hang out with employees." "What changed?" "I saved her son's life," Marcus said simply. "Things change when that happens." "Yeah, but—" Sarah lowered her voice. "Marcus, be careful. Victoria's reputation isn't just about being a tough boss. She's known for keeping everyone at a distance, especially men, especially single fathers. There are rumors about why she's so protective of Ethan." "What kind of rumors?" Sarah glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "That Ethan's father was abusive, that Victoria got out of the relationship when she was pregnant and has been fighting to keep him away ever since. That's why she's so controlling, so cold. She's protecting herself and her son." Marcus thought about the way Victoria had looked at the construction site, the terror in her eyes, the way she'd held Ethan like he was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Thanks for the warning," he said quietly. But he was already thinking that maybe understanding Victoria Chen's walls was the first step to understanding the woman behind them. The weeks that followed fell into an unexpected pattern. Marcus threw himself into the housing project, working late nights and early mornings to crack the structural challenges. Victoria stopped giving him other assignments, clearing his schedule so he could focus. But she also started showing up at his desk around 7 in the evening, when most of the office had gone home, with 2 cups of coffee and questions about his progress. At first, the conversations were purely professional. She'd review his designs, point out potential issues, suggest alternative approaches. Her insights were brilliant, and Marcus found himself actually enjoying the collaboration. But slowly, the conversations began to shift. "How's Daniel?" she'd ask, and Marcus would tell her about his son's latest obsession with Mars colonization, or his fear about the upcoming surgery. "How's Ethan?" Marcus would counter, and Victoria would share stories about her son's dinosaur phase, or his questions about where his father was. 3 weeks after the construction site incident, Victoria arrived at Marcus's desk with coffee and an unusual request. "Ethan wants to meet Daniel," she said without preamble. "He's been asking about him constantly. I told him Daniel is sick, but Ethan says that's exactly why they should be friends, because friends help when you're scared." She paused. "I understand if you'd rather keep your son separate from work, but I thought I'd ask." Marcus considered it. Daniel had been increasingly isolated as his condition worsened. His school friends had gradually stopped visiting because sick kids made them uncomfortable. A new friend might be good for him. "Okay," Marcus said. "This weekend, neutral territory, maybe the Children's Museum." Victoria's face lit up with a smile Marcus had never seen before. Genuine, unguarded, beautiful. "Really? You trust me with Daniel after how I treated you?" "You're not that person anymore," Marcus said quietly. "Or maybe you never were. Maybe you were just scared and didn't know how else to protect yourself." Victoria's eyes glistened. "I've spent 10 years being cruel because cruel meant safe. And then you jumped in front of a truck for my son and reminded me that being safe isn't the same as being alive." That Saturday, Marcus brought Daniel to the Children's Museum, expecting an awkward few hours of supervised small talk. Instead, he found Victoria on the floor of the dinosaur exhibit with both boys, enthusiastically explaining the difference between the Cretaceous and Jurassic periods, while Ethan and Daniel hung on her every word. She'd dressed down for once, jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer, like a woman instead of a CEO. "Did you know," Victoria was saying, "that the T-Rex lived closer in time to humans than to the Stegosaurus? Isn't that wild?" Both boys' eyes were huge. "Really?" Daniel breathed. "Really. Time is weird like that." Victoria looked up and saw Marcus watching. Her smile faltered slightly, like she was self-conscious about being caught having fun. Marcus smiled back, and her expression relaxed. The boys ran off to the space exhibit, and Victoria stood up, brushing off her jeans. Daniel is wonderful. He's so much like you. Curious, brave, kind even when he's scared. He likes you, Marcus said. I can tell. I like him too. Victoria watched the boys examining a model of the International Space Station. Ethan hasn't had a friend in so long. I've been so focused on protecting him that I forgot he also needs connections. Normal childhood experiences. She turned to Marcus. Thank you for trusting me with him. Thank you for seeing him as more than just leverage in whatever complicated thing is happening between us. Victoria flinched. Is something happening between us? Marcus held her gaze. You tell me. You've been having coffee with me every night for 3 weeks. You're sharing stories about your son. You arranged this play date. What would you call it? I'd call it, Victoria said slowly, me trying to figure out how to be a person again instead of just a fortress. How's that going? Terrifying. She smiled slightly. But maybe that's the point. Maybe being alive is supposed to be terrifying. They watched the boys together, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous and warm, and completely inappropriate, given that Victoria was his boss, and he was a single father with a dying son, and no business getting emotionally involved with anyone. But as Ethan grabbed Daniel's hand to show him something, and Daniel laughed, actually laughed for the first time in weeks, Marcus thought maybe being alive was worth the terror. The housing project breakthrough came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, 6 weeks before Daniel's surgery. Marcus had been staring at the same structural problem for 3 days. How to support the building's weight on contaminated soil without using traditional foundation methods that would disturb the toxins. Then he remembered a technique he'd read about in a journal 5 years ago. Biomimicry, using patterns found in nature to solve engineering problems, specifically mangrove roots. Mangrove trees grew in toxic, unstable soil by spreading their root systems wide and shallow, distributing weight across a broader area instead of driving deep. What if the building's foundation did the same thing? Marcus started sketching frantically, running calculations, modeling stress distributions. By 4 a.m, he had a viable design. By 6, he'd refined it enough to be confident it would work. He texted Victoria at 6:30 a.m. I solved it. The foundation problem. I solved it. Her response came back immediately. My office. 1 hour. Marcus arrived with his designs, his notes, and 3 hours of sleep in the last 48 hours. Victoria was already there, her own work spread across her desk, looking like she'd been up all night too. Show me, she said. Marcus spread out the designs and explained his thinking. The biomimicry approach, the stress calculations, the way it would actually improve soil stability over time, instead of just avoiding contamination. Victoria listened with intense focus, asking sharp questions, pushing him to explain every assumption. When he finished, she sat back in her chair and stared at him. This is brilliant, she said quietly. This isn't just solving the problem. This is revolutionizing how we approach sustainable construction on compromised sites. Her voice filled with emotion. Marcus, this is the kind of innovation I built this company to support. The kind of thinking I've been waiting years to find. Does that mean the bonus is approved? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady, even though his hands were shaking. Victoria stood up and walked around her desk. She took his hands in hers, his ink-stained, calloused hands that had been working non-stop for weeks. The bonus is approved. I'll have the money transferred to the hospital tomorrow. She squeezed his hands. You did it, Marcus. You saved your son. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. He'd been holding on so tightly for so long, and suddenly the relief was overwhelming. Thank you, he whispered, for the opportunity, for believing I could do this. Thank you, Victoria said, for showing me that trusting people isn't the same as being weak. She was still holding his hands. They were standing very close, and Marcus was suddenly aware of how beautiful she was, how the morning light caught in her dark hair, how her eyes were warm instead of cold. "Victoria," he started, not sure what he was going to say. She leaned up and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, and tasted like coffee and hope. Marcus froze for half a second, then kissed her back, his hands coming up to cup her face. When they pulled apart, Victoria was crying. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was inappropriate. You work for me. I shouldn't have—" "I've wanted to do that for 3 weeks," Marcus interrupted. "Since you sat on the floor at the museum teaching our sons about dinosaurs, and I realized you were the most extraordinary woman I'd ever met." Victoria laughed, shaky and disbelieving. "I terrorized you for 6 months. You were protecting yourself. I understand protection." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "But Victoria, you don't have to protect yourself from me. I'm not going to hurt you." "Everyone hurts everyone eventually," Victoria whispered. "That's what Ethan's father taught me. That love is just another way to destroy someone." Marcus thought about Sarah, about losing her and raising Daniel alone. Love is terrifying, and yes, sometimes it ends in pain. But Victoria, the alternative is being alone in a fortress of your own making. And that's not living, that's just existing. Victoria closed her eyes. "I don't know how to do this, how to let someone in without falling apart." "Neither do I," Marcus admitted. "But maybe we figure it out together, one terrifying step at a time." Victoria opened her eyes and looked at him with such vulnerability, it made his chest ache. "I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to be controlling and push you away and revert to being cruel when I get scared. And I'm going to be exhausted from taking care of Daniel and probably neglect you when things get hard and definitely panic about money." Marcus smiled. "We're both disasters. But maybe 2 disasters make something stable." Victoria laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. "That's terrible engineering logic. Good thing I'm better at buildings than relationships." She kissed him again, longer this time, and Marcus felt something in his chest that had been frozen for years finally start to thaw. Daniel's surgery was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in mid-November. Marcus arrived at the hospital at 5 a.m. with his son, Victoria, and Ethan in tow. Over the past 6 weeks, the 4 of them had become an unlikely unit. Dinners together, weekend museum trips, bedtime stories that involved both boys. Daniel and Ethan had become inseparable. Ethan drew pictures for Daniel every day. Daniel taught Ethan about constellations. They were brothers in everything but blood. In the pre-op room, Daniel was trying to be brave, but Marcus could see the fear in his eyes. "What if I don't wake up?" Daniel whispered when the nurses stepped out. Marcus took his son's hand. "You will wake up, and I'll be right there when you do. Promise?" "Promise." Ethan climbed up onto Daniel's bed carefully, mindful of the IV lines. "Hey Daniel, when you wake up, we're going to go on a space adventure. A real one. Mum says we can go to the planetarium and see the stars." Daniel smiled weakly. "Can we see Mars?" "We can. See everything," Ethan said with 5-year-old certainty. "Because you're going to be better and we're going to do all the things." Victoria stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Marcus went to her. "He's going to be fine," he said quietly. "You can't know that." Victoria's voice was tight with fear. "I've been reading about the surgery, the complications, the mortality rates." "Stop," Marcus said firmly. "I know you're scared. I'm terrified. But Daniel needs us to believe he's going to make it. So that's what we're going to do." Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes. "I love him. I know it's only been 2 months, but I love your son like he's mine." "I know," Marcus said. "And he loves you too. You and Ethan. You've given him a family when he thought it was just going to be me forever." "Is that what we are?" Victoria asked. "A family?" Marcus looked at the hospital bed where Ethan was holding Daniel's hand, both boys giggling about something. He thought about the last 2 months, the dinners and the museum trips and the late nights when Victoria would call him just to hear his voice. The way she'd stopped being cruel and started being real. The way he'd stopped being just a survivor and started being alive. "Yes," he said, "I think we are." The surgery took 7 hours. Marcus spent them pacing the waiting room while Victoria sat with her laptop, pretending to work, but really just refreshing the same email over and over. Ethan fell asleep on her lap, exhausted from worry. When the surgeon finally came out, Marcus's heart stopped. "The surgery was successful," Dr. Patterson said with a tired smile. "Daniel came through beautifully. His heart is functioning normally. He'll need recovery time and monitoring, but the prognosis is excellent." Marcus felt his legs go weak. Victoria was there instantly, her arm around his waist, holding him up. "Can I see him?" Marcus asked. "He's in recovery. Give him another hour, and then yes." After the doctor left, Marcus pulled Victoria into his arms and just held on. She was crying. He was crying. Ethan woke up and joined the hug without really understanding why, but knowing it was important. "He's okay," Marcus whispered. "He's going to be okay." "You saved him," Victoria said against his chest. "You worked so hard and you saved him." "We saved him," Marcus corrected. "You gave me the opportunity, the project, the money. None of this would have happened without you." Victoria pulled back to look at him. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't jumped in front of a truck for my son. If you hadn't shown me that being brave isn't about having walls. It's about tearing them down." When they finally let Marcus into the recovery room, Daniel was awake and groggy but smiling. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. "Did it work?" "It worked, buddy. You're all fixed." Daniel's eyes drifted to where Victoria and Ethan stood in the doorway. "Are they staying?" "If you want them to." "Forever?" Daniel asked. Marcus looked at Victoria, who was watching them with tears streaming down her face. "If they'll have us." "Forever sounds good," Victoria said, coming to stand beside Marcus. Ethan climbed carefully onto the bed next to Daniel. "We're a family now," Ethan announced. "Right, Mommy." Victoria looked at Marcus, and he saw everything in her eyes. The fear, the hope, the choice to be brave even when it was terrifying. "Right," she said. "We're a family." 6 months later, Marcus stood at the construction site of the sustainable housing development, watching the first foundation being poured using his biomimicry design. Victoria stood next to him, her hand in his, watching her company's biggest project come to life. "You know," she said, "I never thought I'd fall in love at a construction site." "Technically, you fell in love in your office when you kissed me," Marcus pointed out. "Technically, I fell in love the day you jumped in front of a truck for my son." Victoria looked up at him. Everything else was just me catching up to what my heart already knew. Marcus kissed her, not caring that the construction workers were watching with interest, not caring that the site supervisor was probably taking photos for the company newsletter, not caring about anything except this woman who'd been cruel and cold and terrified and had let him see past all of that to the person underneath. His phone buzzed. A text from Daniel, who was at home with Ethan and Mrs. Park, the nanny they'd hired together. "Ethan ate all the cookies again. Also, he says to tell you he loves you. I love you too, Dad. Come home soon." "The boys are demanding our presence," Marcus said, showing Victoria the text. "Our boys," Victoria corrected. "Ours." She'd legally adopted Daniel 2 months ago, just as Marcus was in the process of adopting Ethan. The paperwork was complicated, but they were making it official. 2 broken families becoming one whole one. They left the construction site and drove home together, to the house they'd bought in a neighborhood with good schools, and a yard big enough for dinosaur excavations and telescope stargazing. Daniel and Ethan rushed them at the door, both boys talking over each other about their day, about the cookies, about the fort they'd built in the living room. Later, after dinner and bedtime stories and tucking both boys in, Marcus and Victoria sat on the couch together in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about that day?" Victoria asked. "The construction site?" "Every day," Marcus admitted. "It was the worst and best moment of my life." "Mine too." Victoria turned to look at him. "Thank you for saving my son, for saving me. Thank you for giving me a reason to be brave." They sat there together as the night deepened. Two people who'd been broken and lost and terrified, who'd found each other in the worst possible moment and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Love wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and sometimes still scary. But it was real, and it was theirs. And that was more than either of them had ever thought they'd deserve.